Okay, so week two. So today we're going to get into this problem solution space. Okay, and I'm hoping to get you guys to really engage on this topic and learn more about what problems that you're just trying to address and hear your articulation of them. Okay, so I have a couple of slides, and so you guys hopefully read some of the pre-reading and pre-videos that I sent before. I'm going to do a quick overview here, very fast, okay, and hit on a couple of points that I would like to emphasize, and then just engage you guys on some conversations, as I mentioned earlier. So problem, solution, fit, finding it. Quick reminders, Slack, please share updates. I saw some people dropping in some stuff today. Yay, do that, okay? If you guys want updates, feedback on your ideas, if you need a boost of anything as well, please drop it. Kayleen, hopefully that helped a little bit today. I would say, just DM people directly as well as you try to talk to people. Be aggressive because you need that data, you need that information. Payment number one should be arriving tomorrow and or the day after. So just keep an eye for it. If you don't see anything by the end of this week, you know where to find me. I'll be waiting for you. Hopefully I don't have to hear anything about that you didn't get it, but hopefully you all do get it. Communicate with your mentors. If you're not set up a regular chat window, please do so. It's a nice window. Like my mentees and I have scheduled roughly like 45 minutes to an hour. Again, that just depends on you and your mentors' availabilities and schedules and what you need with your project. The pitch deck sample slides, I'll repeat this again. It is available in the folder, so you can go in there and take a look at any time you want. Take a look at last year's slides. This year, they are a little bit changed a little bit. So every cycle is different. So just take a look. It's in the resource folder. Take advantage. Some fellows completely forget that folder is there until like the end. So I'm going to remind you guys throughout. Okay. And if I add something in there, I'll also let you know. The workbook. Quick thing here. So download the workbook. Okay. And this is one of the tasks after this session. And then reshare it, like save it in your own Google, whatever, and then reshare it with your mentor. The reason why there is that you want to have their input as you go through, okay? So what I've normally been doing with my mentees already is I see them writing their problems, I'm like, this does not make sense, and I highlight, add a little comment, a little edit, and then through this, you do a collaborative editing throughout the document. So you're not just by yourself, you're getting feedback throughout the process, okay? And then don't forget, I would love to chat with you at some point, all of you. I promise I'm not very scary. So use my calendar link in the Slack just to connect with me at least once or more. I'm happy to chat with you as many times as you would like. Okay, so quick blitz here about the topic. If you forget everything today, just remember, start with the problem, start with the problem, start with the problem. A problem well stated is half the problem solved. This is a classic mistake people do because this is what they do normally. They go from solution to the problem. Very tempting, very easy. I've done it many times, and sometimes I fall for it. We listen for the solution, we get in love with it, and then suddenly you just don't want to change it. You're just stuck with it, right? So don't fall into this. You guys are early enough, most of you, even if you're later, try to really just get this down in terms of the problem, trying to tackle, trying to address like a solution, trying to address a specific problem that exists in the community. So again, problem well stated, it's a problem half solved. I'll keep reminding you of this because it's just really, I see it so many times where people don't do this, okay? And what I like to do in my mind is think of it in terms of problem space, spaces, problem space versus solution space, and you can swim in either. People tend to be in the solution space because it's nice and people love to be there, but the problem space, I think, is just as important. The background, the scope, the impact, what's the framing of the problem, which we'll get into today, and want to hear you guys talk a little bit more about your framing of the problem right now. And then naturally the connections will start forming in terms of what you want to do, and what already is in existence. People tend to forget that, right? In this field, and by the way, the field you are all sort of in is this informal STEM world. And this includes all the science communication gigs, whether for-profit, nonprofit, whatever have you, you're in this big bubble. I didn't visualize it for you, which reminds me, I probably need to do a paper about this, but just to showcase the tentacles that exist, how we all connected. It's a really big, massive field, and everybody's doing things differently in there. So you want to know what's going on in your little corner. And it just takes a little bit of extra time to just do some digging. Okay. I promise you, it will be way, way worth it later. Because if you go to a funder, they are going to want to know. So how is this different to what's already out there? How are you different? How's your approach different? And it could be that the problem you're tackling is completely unique, like in a different way. You've reframed the problem in a way that others have not. Funders pay attention to that. Okay. And trust me, from my own reviews I've received from grants, they care. Okay. And mind you, we have not talked about what the evaluation, or what's the activity. We're not going to do that today. You start here first. You get this right, everything else becomes easy to do. Very, very easy. The SWOT analysis, which you'll do much later in the program, thinking about what outputs you're going to be measuring, they all start from this space. There are 2 case studies that, very minor in the video. If you watched it, great. If you haven't, take a look at it. I will not go through them here, but they just provide you space to think through this problem solution spaces that do exist. I want to send a quick shout out to Siniseko. Thank you for sending this little article today. I was reading it and I thought, oh my God, this is actually a really good example. So I just took one and I'll just share with you just one of them. This is a wonderful, storytelling of these kind of folk like you that are building these initiatives around in Africa in particular here. So this was the 10-10-30 radio project, which I found really fascinating, trying to use radio to tackle childhood vaccinations. And so I took components of it, like problem space that they tried to articulate in their little spiel. So long story short, vaccination is low. This is specifically in 2017, so they clearly did some homework here, right? So again, this is where the landscape analysis slide that you can have on your pitch deck show us that you've done a little bit of homework, something that is relevant to your problem. And then they go in and articulate. So there's several reasons why, right? So this is now kind of getting to in the possible solutions I can get into this, right? You can imagine that they want to build they lack adequate maternal health facilities, so maybe they should go and build the facilities. That'll be expensive. So maybe it's a born at home, they don't have the shots. There's also a lack of access of information on vaccines and vaccines themselves. So again, they're still exploring these problem solution space. And you can add on here in terms of what could potentially be the issue that is causing the low vaccination rate. But for the sake of time, I'm not going to have you go through the potential, but in your mind, think of that, right? All these issues that are there. And so in the kind of the solution space, again, radio is, they got to this one thing. Radio is one of the country's most popular communication channels, but healthcare workers hadn't previously used it to engage with the public. And so this is a big thing here to, they landed on this aspect, right? They've been doing their homework. They got to this potential solution. So their idea was to essentially to reach more people through broadcasting, radio broadcasting, to improve childhood vaccination rates, right? So why is this? Radio is very penetrant, more so than TV or internet access, right? Which they knew, they do some numbers, 20% of the population has reliable, only 20% has reliable internet access. So if you were thinking about potential solution, right, if you were going to do something internet-based, this would be a problem, right, that you're already running into. And these are things that I see a lot where people are designing solutions again, and you're like, well, how is that going to work in this environment, right? And again, you have to think about who is the actual audience you're trying to tackle. Sometimes people trying to tackle all audiences in the world. I'm like, don't do that. Be specific, start specific first, and try to see if you need to expand or not. But this is an exercise that you should be doing yourself right now. And it helps a lot when you start talking to your potential, I say users broadly here, audience. You got to talk to them. You have to talk to them. You got to talk to them, okay? It's really important that you do so. And this is where you want to be living at this point in time. Some of you may be strong already, well articulated in this space, but just double check that you really are addressing the problem that you think you're addressing, because sometimes you're not. With SAI, we went through multiple iterations at the beginning, try to figure this thing out. Okay, and the way I did it was to talk to a lot of people. I worked with them also, trying to figure out what is it that we're going to try here? What is the actual problem that we're trying to address? And it's a couple of years later that we realized actually the problem, the audience was wrong. And so the problem was misstated. So we had to reframe the problem. The organization didn't change, thankfully. We got our nonprofit status in 2018, but we had been operating since 2015. So by the time we got the nonprofit status, it was easy for us to, like, we already articulated that on paper. Okay, so easy. It was good that we didn't settle too quickly. We would have had problems. So the point of reframing is not to find a real problem, but to see if there's a better one to solve. So as I told you, we found a better one in our discovery process as we went through this. And I'll tell you, we did this over a couple of years. Okay, you guys have like a couple of weeks, right, to do this. But when you launch from our program, it's not the idea like, oh, your problem is settled. No, assume that you're still wrong. Assume you're still wrong, because in that sort of mental framing, you will always be searching for this, trying to tackle your assumptions and say, well, maybe this is incorrectly framed. Maybe the audience is wrong here. I'm talking to the wrong person. So you got to be asking yourself those questions and get uncomfortable doing so, because, God forbid it. Yes, you were indeed wrong. That's actually good. The earlier you find that out, the better. Okay. So searching for the problem solution fit, the logic model is kind of the holy grail. I made you guys read this intro in pages 1 through 4 of the logic model, the dev guide. Very, very useful. If you haven't, please take a look. It's just a nice, quick read, very, very fast. What is it? It's theory of change. You'll hear this word, logic model, theory of change, visually linking the connection between the problem and the solution and the rest of the components of that logic model. Most people don't use this when you're building programs, or they do it at the total sort of tail end of the program. They finish the program, or they've launched their business and they're doing this after the fact. Yikes. Okay. At that point, you're sort of too far down the line. You can switch things, but you want to do this at the beginning, okay, to try to get all those components in there. So causes and effects, that's essentially what you want to measurable outcomes of interest. Whether you're nonprofit, for-profit, doesn't matter. I don't care. This is still true, right? Even if your goal is to run a profitable business, you still want to have an impact of some kind. So you need to know what that is beyond just making more money. And so this is logic model in one pager. You guys have this on page 2 of your workbooks. I kind of I put it all in one figure here, and you see the problems really at the top. Most logic models actually don't have this segment, but I put it there because I think it's really important, as I mentioned, and connecting that to your outcomes. And then you can work backwards here to your outcomes that connect to your outputs, what activities you're doing, to what you need to actually make it work. And then what assumptions are you making in all of this throughout, right? As you start building this, you will see your entire initiative on paper in one page. So when a funder comes through, it's already here. You can connect the dots. When a new team member comes through, you can just show them this and start discussing with them what on earth you're trying to do, right? When the progress report is due, same thing, right? This becomes your go-to. We have one for SAI. We have one for the SAI Fellows Program, the summer program. I've had a bunch of other ones for other initiatives I've tried. Some have died because I realized they weren't going to work, but that's okay, right? And we'll get into this next week and the week after. But right now, it's just focusing on the top here, problem and your solution in terms of what you're trying to do and how that connects to the outcomes that you seek, okay, that are there. So you can flip that if-then statements. That's another way. It's in the video as well. You can watch if I have inputs, to resource going to run the program. If I am able to achieve the activities and what outputs will I be able to showcase to impact the outcomes that I measure, the behavioral changes or the actual change that I want to see in the community, in my specific audience, and so forth. So most important step, if you have not gotten to this point, It's the framing of the problem or problems for some of you. Swim in this space in the middle. It's really wonderful. I love being there. It's what I listen to in any pitches, in any conversations I have, in any report. I try to get in here first and try to understand what's happening. Okay, so some advice. Don't assume stuff. Don't assume stuff. Do your homework. People don't do this part. And it's very easy right now, especially with Google. You can do this from wherever you are. Just do, spend a couple hours trying to make sure, do your landscaping, figuring out what's out there right now, where's the actual gap, what can I do to make this thing work, and talk to your potential audience / users. That's one thing that I've always noticed people just don't do. They use their own experience only. It's nothing wrong with that, but you can't just use your experience alone. It needs to be in context as well. Okay, so with that, I wanted to perfect. Hopefully, I rushed through that intentionally because a lot of it is already sort of written down for you to digest more fully. But I wanted to rehash this content for our conversation today. And so here's what we're going to do. And this will happen every week. So I will do a quick debrief like this. Okay, high level, dig in on some few things, but not really get in there too much because you're already doing this with your one-on-one mentors, okay, where you're really getting in there. So for today, as a group, right, where each of you can help each other, okay, try to state the problem, okay, you're trying to address, and then give us some context in terms of where that problem lives, and then how do you relate to the problem? Is there a link? Have you personally experienced this problem yourself, for example, right, that you're trying to address? And that's important, okay? Because when things get tough, okay, when you're 2-3 years in, it's not working, people don't get it, you're not getting any funding, this is what's going to keep you going, okay? This is what is going to keep you going. Now I can tell you stories. Oh my goodness. I've been there, okay? Website is acting up. I'm like, wow, finance, right? Trying to figure out financing divisions in the back end. How do I do this? If you forget how you relate to the problem, if you forget what the genesis, that drive that originally got you in, you'll quit, hands down, okay? And I don't know what the real number is in terms of the field and survival rates out there. I already told you for our program, it's about 60%, okay? So the odds are not in your favor here, guys, right? And I just want to be frank with you because it's really tough out there. There's lack of funding. There's a lot of duplication of efforts. There's a lot of duplication, right? And people don't want to collaborate. I'm trying to address that myself, but it's really hard. So you got to connect yourself, find that connection, find that foundation that will anchor you when those hard times come, and they will, so that you can keep going and fight through the darkness, okay? Sorry to be a little bit morbid there, but so here's the thing. So I would like each of you to kind of give us a spiel, try your best, okay? It might not sound great right now, who cares? Doesn't matter, right? We're all friends. Tell us the problem, and in the fewest sentences possible, if you can, okay? If you have some data, go ahead, throw it in there, all right? If you know some people that are kind of in the same space, go ahead, throw them in there. If you don't know, just say, I don't know who's in this space. I need to find out. That's okay. And then tell us how you relate to the problem. Don't pitch your solution, all right? Don't do that. Just the problem. Okay, so I think the next slides after this are for something else. Okay. So I am gonna pick on someone to go first. So Brittany, you are on my immediate side here. Go for it.
Hey everyone. I would say that the problem that I am trying to address is the lack of experiential opportunities for students in the PK to 12 area in Jamaica. That would be my target audience. I find that from personal experience of engaging with the children and having workshops with them before, they complain about the fact that they don't get the chance to do more with their hands and do more critical thinking activities and to do more of that type of learning. It's usually like a lecture-based learning. And so I want to ensure that they have the opportunity because they don't have access to that. There are individuals in Jamaica who work on that, but typically they cater to not like low income, low resource areas. It's usually individuals who can afford to pay for outside activities or extracurricular activities to fund, that type of lifestyle, or they have the parents who know that these things are important. And so they force their children to do it. So I'm trying to provide that to a community that lacks that. So I would say that's my problem right now.
Okay, so the floor is open. I have a bunch of questions, but I'm going to refrain as much as possible. If you got it, go ahead, ask your specific questions. If you didn't get it as well, just any aspect that did not make sense, please go ahead, just jump in.
You said you had workshops and they were complaining. When did you have these workshops, and what specifically were they complaining about?
So I get to work with students typically on the weekends through some programs that I already have running through Caribbean Youth Development Institute. And so those students, their ages like 10 to 11. And I work with them on weekends to do more project-based learning activities. And so after like my workshops where, for example, I'd have them go through a whole solve the mystery through these scientific experiments, put together these clues, put together these puzzle piece. The students are like, oh, can we do more like this? In class, we don't get to do anything of this sort. The teacher just tells us what to do and there's only one way to do it. And so they don't get the space to be as creative or as expressive. And they don't find the freedom in, how they be in charge of their learning experience. So I want to create that for the students. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Thank you.
Anybody else before I fire one away here? Okay, a quick one, Brittany. So why students? Why not teachers? Because if you look at the problem space here, teachers are part of the equation. You got students, and you also got parents. Again, for all of you, you see how I just broke that down, right? There's multiple people that are involved. So why target the students here? What's your intuition?
The reason why I'm targeting the students is because I've had the most interaction with them. And I personally can relate to just wanting to find opportunities for like my younger cousins and individuals I do have in Jamaica who can't afford to pay for these programs. And I found that there weren't any of those. So it's more of a personal thing. And I also love working with younger students and engaging with them. I do think that working with the teachers would be more of an exponential impact. And I honestly would love to do both, but you always tell us to focus on one or the other. And so that's kind of why I am using the students right now, because I've had the most interaction with them through the workshops.
Okay, all right, good job. Look forward to seeing how this problem kind of nails down and you articulating in like a sentence or two to the point. Get some numbers, okay? Get some numbers in your sort of articulation, right? And if you're talking with parents as well, if you can talk with parents, I think getting that insight would be really great. Okay, Kaylin, you're up next.
Okay. The problem is that there's communities or groups of people who start to distrust science and health claims that they see that are published through the media, kind of regardless of who is publishing them, because and the reason they start to distrust is because they see contradictory claims over time. So they see headlines that say something is healthy and then it's unhealthy, or this is safe or it's not safe. And they don't have a way to evaluate those claims and why they're seeing contradictions. So that's the problem. And the landscape, there are ways to, I mean, obviously you can search for science information. So there's like WebMD or Wikipedia or things like that that are out there, but they're not, one, it takes a lot of reading usually, which some communities that they struggle with that more or just won't do it. And the other part is that main difference, I think, is that they're not summarizing an overall concept. You're just still reading about maybe one experiment or a question, but you don't see an overall picture of what science has been done in that topic. And how I relate, kind of the reason that I transitioned from doing research to science communication was seeing this questioning or distrust or misunderstanding of science in my friends and family and community. Yeah, and wanting to do something about that. So.
Okay, quickly, who is the audience here?
So I think I have, like in the workbook, it says who's the user and then who's like, I think I have two. I think my main audience in my idea is that individuals and organizations who publish science information, that's an audience of who can use this tool that I'm going to put out, hopefully. But the secondary audience is the individuals who actually have the distrust in science. So my goal would be to kind of shift how science is communicated with this new visual idea, this tool. And then the impact would be communities can begin to trust science more when they have this different way of viewing the information.
Open, the floor is open. Ryan, looked like you were going to ask a question. and I cut you off, sorry.
Got nothing right now.
Yeah, so that's good that you broke up primary and secondary. You can do that, absolutely, right? It sounds like your primary are these producers, right, of the content, perhaps, right? And that's fine, right? You can break it down like that, just like what Brittany was talking about. There's potential, all the audiences that are there, parents, teachers, and whatever.
Yeah,
got to start somewhere, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, and what do you mean by trust? Is that something that, like, how will you know your thing is working? And wait, now just to give you context here, now we're going into the outcome space a little bit. So connecting that problem to the outcome and say, so what is this metric of yours called trust? How are you going to be measuring that to know that it's working?
That's a good question. I think what I mean by trust is, or a distrust of science claims would be, what I hear from people is science has been wrong before, so I'm just going to make decisions based on what people that I know have done, my family or my community. I'm going to make health decisions based on those stories that I hear from people, and I'm not going to use the information that I see from scientific sources because I trust personal stories more than so using it for decision making, I think, and not being willing to take that scientific information that they get online and use it in their daily lives by getting a vaccine or whatever, medication or something like that. But measuring that, I think, would be a lot harder. I think at first, the sort of short-term outcomes, is that what it's called? Would be sort of the interaction of the tool itself. So see how many views or page hits or whatever on the visual tool, but then longer term impact, I think, would be, I mean, is it crazy to say stuff like, you know, changing the percentage of people that are vaccinated in certain communities, or like impacts on how they make decisions about their health, that kind of thing?
I mean, absolutely not. You can have any sort of lofty target, but you need to sort of try to figure out what is critical, right? What's important for you, that you will know if this metric is moving, then the problem that I'm trying to address has changed, right? You do have two audiences in primary and secondary. However, like you got to figure out what's your primary, very importantly, because then what you measure against them might be different, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, whether like behavior changes that you're going to start, and we'll get into this later, like behavior changes in the outcome space. So which behavior changes? The organizations, you know, the people that are pumping out this information versus the consumers, right? So which behavior for you is like more important? You don't have to answer that, but
yeah,
you gotta think about those things. Thank you, Kayleen. That was good. Okay, so we got Brittany down, Kayleen's down. All right, so next up, Siniseko. So give us a go. What's the problem?
Okay. So the problem is that people do not understand the science that they use every day and the science that affects their daily lives. So how let me just go back to the, okay. So my landscape looks like people who are engaging, like there's this program, a WhatsApp program, people who are sharing about HIV and AIDS and TB with like local high school students, and people like Usbusiso Biera, he is communicating science in isiZulu, which I am trying to do. I'm trying to make sure that science is communicated in our local languages. So, and people who are like, there's also the Begisisa Center for Health Journalism. They help to inform people so that they are aware about what's going on when it comes to like the science that they use and the science that affects them every day. So right now, I relate to the problem in that, okay, I have people in my life who use scientific products, like let's say antiseptic liquid or like antibiotics, or like when it comes to antiseptic liquid, you're not supposed to drink it, right? It's for external use. And I feel like if people understood like the science behind that, they'd be able to make wiser decisions. I have people who have who need to understand science. So people who are gluten intolerant, like my friend is gluten intolerant. So she wanted to learn more about her condition, to understand the science behind that, because she studied chemistry. So she was telling me that it would have been nice for her to learn more about that kind of science and to engage with it. And also a friend chose to do economics instead of science when she was in high school. And she said to me, if there had been more science engagement, she would have understood the different fields that one could take in science. For example, she didn't know much about microbiology or any of these scientific fields until like COVID. And then she was like, oh, I could do that. So like it would be helpful for people to be able to understand science in their own language so that they can make better decisions and be more engaged with science.
Okay, there's a lot there. It's kind of similar to Kayleen as well. You definitely want to hash that out. Brittanya, I see an immediate hand there. Go for it.
Yeah. So are you trying to approach it from, like, I feel like there are multiple sectors, possibly, like I hear you talk about the disease aspect of it, like if someone has this particular illness and they want to know more about it. And then I hear you talk about just choices in attempting to go into a science career. And then you talk about just education. Or do you know, like, you know, which one of those? Because I feel like understanding science, you should like choose one of those paths that you kind of mentioned, so that you could really focus on, you know, how your database, because I think you said you're going to do a database, like how your database would differentiate the type of education that you bring across.
Okay.
Yeah. Good
Thank you. I'll start with the database, right? After speaking to my mentor, I'm still developing a way of solving the problem that relates to my community and that is able to engage them in a way that they are familiar with. So in terms of tackling all of those aspects, I've looked at my landscape, and people in my landscape do focus, like, for example, the EA was a program, right? They mainly focus on HIV and TB, and then Pegisisa Center for Health Journalism, they focus on more on just, well, on literally a lot of a variety of different science fields. So I firmly think for my project that it would be beneficial to tackle all of those aspects, because they do affect our lives every day, and it would be helpful to have a resource for that. So it doesn't have to be, initially when I was thinking about the info, like the database, I was looking at infographics and everything. So I could just like separate let's say I'd have a section for disease and a section for, for how to make wiser decisions when you use scientific products, or a section for engagement. Yeah, that's what I've been thinking.
So to definitely like try to, this is what the solution, we're running to solution space quite heavily now, right? Very tempting, yeah. Very, very tempting. Try to minimize that because you're running there and it's easy to get there very easily. Okay, so Tanya, do you have a comment or a question?
I guess both. So I think what I got from your spiel, first of all, I think the problem you're trying to face is like a very huge problem, and I commend you for trying to address the problem, but it does have a lot of components you have to think about. I think, first of all, I would like to understand who your target audience is. I think what you're trying to address is like health and literacy problems for people, because information is not available in a language that's preferred to them. So I guess I would want to understand which community specifically, like what language does that community speak? Are you going to be maybe translating information, interpreting at community centers. You also mentioned that you had your friend who talked about how they wish they would have learned more about science and health in general growing up. So are you going to potentially incorporate that into like K through 12 education or university education? So just understanding like who the target audience is and maybe what components you want to incorporate into your programming are what my questions are and comments.
Thank you.
So Siddhiseko, definitely keep those in mind. You don't have to answer that right now. I want you definitely to think about and take that as you are articulating the problem, and for all of you as well, right? As you're connecting the dots, you see the specificity really matters here. So Tanya, thank you so much for that insight. Ryan, you are up next.
Right. So mine is pretty broad, and I'm working on honing it in, but the problem is the lack of excitement and lack of positive association that many children, grades 1 through 5 in particular, have with science, and which can lead to a distrust later in life. And so my target audience is children of grades 1 through 5, and then technically I'm selling to teachers, or like distributing to teachers who will, visit the classroom. The landscape, there are definitely a lot of videos out there, lots of content, and a lot of animations. But from what I've seen, there aren't that many that are kind of going from more of like an emotional or artistic thing that then can be delved more into the science with the lesson plan things. But there's a lot of like mnemonic device type videos, and there's a lot of fun things like that, which I am going for in a sense, but also, looking for like to form an emotional connection per se. And yeah, there's definitely some stuff like that on YouTube, stories that I've seen. I haven't noticed any like businesses or anything like that yet, although I'm asking around with forums at the moment. And yeah, just the combination of music and story, I haven't seen too much of just yet. And then, yeah, how I relate to the problem. Well, personally, I definitely remember like Schoolhouse Rock and these types of things were really, really engaging just in school, and they really always captured my attention and got me inspired for science. And yeah, like the eyewitness theme was always a good one, but yeah, that's about it so far.
So Ryan, can you say the problem in a sentence? And
sure.
I've done this. I've avoided asking those who've gone before this question, but it's coming for you eventually. Okay, Ryan is just going to go through it right now. In a sentence, frame the problem.
Okay. The lack of excitement and lack of positive association that many children have with science, which can lead to a distrust later in life, which is kind of like two problems, but.
Okay. Excitement, and
yeah,
that we can get into that as to what that means, but the floor is open for questions, comments that Ryan can take as he gets focused.
I guess this might be part of the solution, maybe too much, but maybe I can frame it as the problem. Is the problem like, is part of the problem connecting a video or an animation with then what comes after as far as the teachers, what they do, or the lesson plan, or that part of it?
I would say that's more the solution or like an outcome, like that's what I'm trying to output, and that's going to help solve the problem.
So will that be part of the project? The curriculum part is part of it too?
Yeah. With like, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Ryan. Go ahead.
I was just going to say like with themes of the video, so like same characters.
Emily?
Yeah, it sounds really interesting, but I was just wondering, do you have any evidence like for the fact that kids watching animations or videos then does get them more excited about science?
Yeah, so that's definitely something that I'm also working on with Dr. Wisco, just getting, even if anecdotal at the moment, just getting forms to educators and, having them show one of my videos and then surveying the kids and having it sent back. I think that would be really useful if we can get enough data points on that. And yeah, so work on that, but I think that would be really, really helpful.
Yeah, I think the problem certainly to me kind of needs tightening down a little bit and reframing slightly. I like I think so. Kayleen's question I think is still valid in a sense of like you can try to reframe what are other problems that are preventing kids, right, from getting this excitement, even in this sort of you're trying to use your music, right, to be as a vehicle, right, to get them excited in that space, in what people are doing there already. What are the problems, right? What issues that are people that are already in the space running into? Right? You can frame the problem in that way to say, I'm tackling this because if I fix this, this would be the vehicle to get the following things, right? So kind of to Tanya's question there, comment earlier, like primary versus secondary, you could have that effect where the immediate problem is actually there's this huge problem here that there's no like X affecting Y is not possible right now, right? Because for whatever reason. And so I'm trying to tackle that. The reason why I say trying to be very focused is I'm thinking of a grant application, right? Because they'll get to just tell me exactly what is the problem you're trying to address, like very specific. And you don't have room to circumnavigate the world, right? Describe what excitement means. You can, but you don't have a lot of room to do that. It needs to get to the bottom line of what you're trying to do and who is going to affect and how you're going to figure it out, whether it's having an effect or not. As well. And sometimes, and I'll add this as well, sometimes you think the audience are the kids. I would challenge that for all of you. Whoever your audience is, I would challenge you to say, are you sure? Are you sure? Is there a better audience? They could be right there in front of you, you've never been seeing them. Okay, one of my fellows in the past, they never saw parents as part of the equation for their program. And I just dropped it in, like, oh yeah. Turns out no one is doing anything in that space for the parents. They always get left out, right? Ignored. And that became a whole trajectory that they took. Just food for thought for all of you. Okay, don't like go and redo everything. I'm just throwing questions. Emily, please pitch us your problem.
Sure. So I'll try and do this concisely. So what's the problem? The main problem that I'm trying to address is the lack of collaboration and communication between scientists in different fields. So the landscape is, I guess, universities and research institutions. There are interdisciplinary centers that exist even within my own university that I'm at right now. But when I looked into them, they aren't really what I'm envisioning. It'll be like energy or climate change or conservation, which is already a really broad topic that inherently involves different areas of research. So what I'm trying to kind of do is start a conversation between more like distinct fields of research that don't really overlap. And so I relate to this problem because I had multiple interests as an undergrad and a high school student, and I felt kind of boxed in, or I felt that I had to choose one path, especially within academia. When you do a PhD as well, like you have to really just focus on a very specific project in like the hard sciences. And I know a lot of people, a lot of grad students and postdocs, and also people who run labs who also have multiple interests but feel a bit boxed in just because of the way that the system is kind of run. And like in order to get grants and advanced research, you do have to stay pretty focused. So what I'm envisioning is starting a conversation between scientists in different fields. And I guess my end goal would really be maybe a center within a university where people are working on one project, but they're all from different backgrounds, because like I'm doing neuroscience and a background in physics or chemistry or even math would be really useful for me. And so, people say like, oh, well, then take this course and you can learn the skills that you need to learn in order to advance your specific project. But I think re-envisioning this would kind of like definitely advance science a lot more, because if instead of taking the time out of my skill set and like how I do my experiments to learn a different field temporarily, like just working with someone who's a mathematician or a physicist on the same project, I think would like just be really great for scientific progress. So I plan to conduct interviews and then post them online and reach universities as well as younger students who are interested in maybe pursuing an interdisciplinary career, and like knowing that it's possible. There are people out there who also kind of want to re-envision how scientists collaborate and communicate, because I feel like it's a bit deterred right now in universities. There's more pressure to really just stay focused on exactly what you're doing.
Okay. All of you are so rich. These problems are so rich. I'm like, oh my goodness. Commend you all, definitely. Questions, the floor is open. No comments. Everyone is thinking, oh, go ahead.
Is there like, so if you start conversations with people, what kind of do you envision the next step of that being, or how do you like get people to move on from the conversation part?
Yeah, so what I plan to do is initially individually interview people and then bring them together and pair them up, so a joint interview. And so the next step would then kind of be like creating a community, whether it's an online community or within a specific institution, of people and connecting them, and then hopefully fostering those connections will then like lead to new conversations and actually I don't know, making it something that people can collaborate on, and like having these discussions will hopefully then aid in like a real collaboration within the scientific community and mentorship as well.
So who is the audience exactly, like your primary audience?
I think my primary audience is people, graduate students, undergrads, and postdocs, like who are in a hard science field. But then also I do want to make it very accessible to anyone, and also like high school students, so that they can just be a part of this conversation. And I do, for that part, I want everyone that is going to be a part of this to be open to mentorship as well. Because obviously,
so Emily, there's a lot there. Okay, you mentioned like 5 different audience types, graduate students to the public to young people. I'm like, whoa, right? And this is for everybody as well. You want to figure out who is having the problem very explicitly, right? Is it that the public, and the public is also too broad? You got to think about who exactly in the public am I talking about is having this issue of understanding the different, like the connections between disparate fields, for example, or is it that you're trying to really enhance collaboration within the sciences, right? Like between scientists of different fields so they collaborate. Those are 2 different problems, right? And commend you trying to tackle both, but you'll find yourself not doing either well if you're trying to go after everything. You got to think about what is the core of this thing, right? And then is doing these interviews the best approach? Don't run there, okay? So someone I told you earlier, don't run to a solution. Think really about the problem.
right.
Is this video is the best way, or is there another way to do this, right? Depending on the problem, right? So you don't have to answer those. I just want you to think about them, that you're trying to bite a lot into right now. But I urge you all, and please trust me on this, that less is more, always. And I've learned that the hard way. Any other last minute comments and questions? Okay, so I look forward to seeing, Emily, how you narrow that down. Okay. All right, last one. Tanya, take us through it.
Awesome. I just so you guys know, I changed my Wi-Fi yesterday. If I stop writing the chat, I'm looking at the chat and I'll just turn my video off or something. Just let me know. I guess the problem that I'm trying to address is the fact that Latinos are disproportionately underrepresented in STEM fields. The specific field I want to tap into is biomedical engineering. There are a few mentorship opportunities as well as just overall programming for Latinos in biomedical engineering that's available to them. So with Latinx and BME, we're an organization working to get nonprofit status. We are working to provide professional development opportunities, tools, and mentorship opportunities for minority students all the way through faculty or professional careers in biomedical engineering. Through monthly workshops, this could be a couple times a month that include everything from just professional development to social wellness, funding opportunities, conferences, and many others. In terms of how do I relate to the problem, or I'm a minority in biomedical engineering, trying to navigate just college in general was very difficult. And as a peer mentor for Latinos in engineering at my university, I was able to see how many students we lose in those first few years of undergraduate, even at the graduate level, because they don't have the mentorship, they don't have the guidance, they don't have someone who looks like them, who has done it before, a person who maybe had to work full-time while in school full-time, because not everyone has to have the same experiences. So having someone you can truly relate to, who can advise you, is really meaningful. So that's how I relate to the problem. I didn't have that. I'm 27 years old now. And as a 27-year-old now, I realize how valuable networking is. Who you keep in your network, your connections, and just participating in development courses and programming whenever possible. But I didn't know this back when I was 18 years old, 20, 21, 22. It took a while, and it's because I didn't have those mentors back then. I didn't know other biomedical engineers who were Latinos, who were doing what I want to do in academia and in medicine. So developing this programming would facilitate those conversations for minority students all the way through faculty or professional careers. In terms of what's currently out right now, there are a lot of different nonprofit organizations that target minorities or Latinos in STEM, but a lot of them are too broad, or they target like all engineering. But I've realized that there are just so few Latinos in BME that it's oftentimes just so difficult to find that one mentor. Like, I've been part of the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers for like 8-9 years now. And I was the only BME in my chapter for 5 years. In my executive board, I was the only BME for the past like 8-9 years. So even within those organizations, representation is still so low that having something specific is helpful. In terms of just like measuring our output for the programming, I think it would be really important to have pre and post surveys for all of the sessions. So let's say we host X number of professional development workshops. They could be journal clubs, research talks. How do you analyze your data, or how do you make data look visually appealing for a publication? So having surveys in which we assess like knowledge, maybe confidence, like how did this workshop increase your confidence, and so on. In terms of maybe some of the social events, maybe having surveys that talk about like what do you learn about networking and the importance of it, because oftentimes among minority communities, we don't know how important these tools are. And then just overall satisfaction with Latinx and BME, our programming, what the weaknesses are, the strengths, just so every year we can iterate and improve everything. Because ultimately, we don't want to keep doing something wrong because we don't want to ask for feedback. So I think that's something really important. And yeah, if you guys have any questions, happy to answer.
That's good. I'll fire one quickly right now. What transition point specifically are you trying, like, are you focused in? The pipeline there is pretty broad, and you said broadness is the sickness in this field. So what transition point are you addressing? And then, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I knew someone was gonna ask that question, and I was waiting for that question. So the BME, the Latino BME community is actually so small that as of now, we're trying to target all of those transition points from undergrad to grad school, from like the master's to the PhD, from the PhD to the postdoc, from postdoc through the faculty position. And we're trying to create a community based on that. Right now, we're running fully on Slack, and we have channels basically for every transition level where we post different opportunities that could be grants, fellowships, positions, like could be like faculty positions, academic positions, and so on. So as of now, we want to target all of those points, because even if you're a faculty member who's been in academia for 20 years, attending a workshop where they talk about how to use like Python to improve data visualization can always help someone. So that's why as of now, we're gonna keep it a little more broad, yet still very specific to Latinos and BME, from the student through the faculty/professional position.
Okay. I think there's still, you can still narrow it down a little bit in terms of what specifically you're trying to address, because that there's multiple things that are happening in there, and you may end up trying to do it all, different levels, okay-ish, but not well, because you're diffuse, right? And there's nothing wrong starting one place, focusing on that, making it like headway, and then expanding, right? Because the need is telling you to do that, and you slowly grow and expand. Just food for thought, okay? Just to keep it, and maybe the right call is to do it all right now, right? And I think you probably have been doing that already. And maybe I would say, look at your own data right now that you already have, right? And I told you all, please speak to someone in your audience, right? 1 or 2 people. If you have not done so, please do it. It's painful, but it's necessary, okay? Because it's going to make a difference. Any other comments for Tanya? Questions?
I had a clarifying maybe. Is the main problem the lack of mentorship, or the lack of like resources / training for that group?
I think it's a combination of both, because oftentimes the resources are there, but even if they're there, you might not have someone that has told you they're there, or someone who has told you how to do it before. So I think it's a combination of both. Because I know that in terms of universities, oftentimes there's a lot of funding available for student travel and so on, but a lot of times students don't know that's available because no one has told them. So hosting workshops where we talk about how do you approach travel awards, or how do you approach research grant applications that you can use for whatever expenses, are things that we're incorporating into our programming.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, guys, I'm like soaked up here with all your questions and problem statements. I'm trying to think deeply about how do I make sure that we help you through all this. Notice the question I've been asking all of you is, who's the audience? Right. That is a constant thing. And some grant applications, any funder, sponsor, they're going to know, who is this affecting, right? And what is the change that like you want to see at the end of this, right? So Tanya, you went into the evaluation space. We're going to get there. Don't worry. We're going to have you guys actually draft questions, bring them here and let everybody sort of give them a test run, right? So we'll get there. But challenge your assumptions. Who's the audience? Am I tackling the right audience here, right? Is my approach correct, right? Ryan, I was just thinking out loud there a little earlier, and I was thinking maybe, you have your, I think you said, how old were your target audience?
Grades 1 through 5.
1 through 5, right? So, and I think also for Britannia earlier, like teachers are there too, right? Is it maybe they're lacking some ability to do something, to use music in a way that's novel, right? And maybe you have a better way of teaching them how to do it, right? Because then you can really, you can scale pretty aggressively, because and have like a multiplying factor, right? Because one teacher will affect like, hundreds and thousands of kids in a year, right? Versus you trying to go at them yourself and integrating into kind of like a school district and so forth. Just food for thought as you think about this. Your audience, like making sure your audience is the one that's having the problem and you're trying to address is really, really important, right? But for all of you, I'm hearing just narrowing down of that problem statement. Tanya, I think you're right that you're kind of focused on Latinos for sure. And depending on how big the team is in terms of what your outcomes do you want, right? Because if you want to change, like increase the number of Latinos in BME, like in every single level, right? That's fine, right? But you want to start somewhere. Like what level is number one right now that you want to see change with, right? And is it the high school to undergrad transition point, right? Where you can measure how many of them are making it through to that stage, or the next one, or the one after that. If the team is large enough, you can tackle all of it all. But if you're having limited resources, you want to start somewhere and showcase the impact clearly. Okay, so with that, this week, I would say try to narrow that down, really be clear, okay? Start entering this now on paper in the workbook, all right? And I'll tell you, this is going to be painful at times because people will come back and say, that doesn't make sense. That's okay. And when all of you make it to talk to me eventually, I'll just be very blunt if I think like it doesn't make sense, okay? I'd rather do it here rather than let you guys go out there and have people ask you these questions, right? I want to test them here in this safe environment. But still, start entering this information, start discussing them with your mentor. And then this week, again, if you haven't talked to an audience member, a user, try to talk to them now, get that information, use that as fuel as you're articulating your problem statement. And then naturally, we're going to migrate into evaluation space because ultimately, all of you want to have impact of some kind, right? And the next question next week is going to be, how does that connect to that impact, right? How does your problem connect to the impact? Because sometimes people want to change the world, but they're tackling the wrong problem completely, right? So those two still need to be connected. So if in the logic model, what we're doing is sort of working backwards down there. Okay, so let me just finish up my slides here. So this is where we were. This is what I've been talking about right now, kind of thinking backwards from the problem, your solution, and connecting it to the outcomes in terms of the behavioral change that you want to see for your intended audiences, okay? Nail that down, be specific, all right? And then ultimately, the pitch deck that you guys are developing, keep in mind, so in the curriculum guide, I also have a little comments in there in terms of where you should be, what you should be doing for your pitch deck, right? Follow that. It's a nice little tool. So I've been telling you a little bit how you connect to the problem. So who are you? Framing the problem is really important. You should have a slide that explicitly goes into that. So start like putting some ideas down and so forth, what the solution is. How does the solution connect to what's out there already? You guys have already been trying to do that. If you don't know the full scale, do your research. Are you different? Are you better? And then we'll get into evaluation, traction, and so forth later on. But this is a guide, and each week essentially gives you some ammo, I hope, to put together these slides and build this deck. And what's the point of a deck? It's not for you to just pitch on the last day. You can use this for special sponsors. If you're going to a school district, if you're going to pitch to teachers, you can have this available already so that they know what's going on. Okay, and that's it for today, guys. I hope this was useful. I think the sharing of feedback and giving feedback to each other, I think is really important because you get to see some of things from a different vantage point. Okay, and continue to do that. Continue sharing on Slack. We're all there. I will say that we do have an additional 2 mentors, Jessica and Pete. You may see them commenting, and they're there as well at large. So if you find yourself like, guys, I'm trying to narrow this down and it's not making sense, just write it in. Someone will jump in and give you feedback, and use a space, guys. Use a space. This is the whole point, because I've had these problems myself, and that's why I'm like thinking like I'm in your shoes. I'm with you right now, trying to build this thing, SAI, and it's the same questions I'm having all the time. They don't change at all. Okay. And so with that, have a good rest of the week, and I look forward to seeing you on Slack, and see you next week.
Thank you.
Bye.